I want you and your briefcase off my ranch right now.
This ranch is mine now. You signed the papers.
I stood on the porch of my family's ranch, Ironwood Creek, the morning sun already baking the dust, and I was holding a piece of paper that felt less like a notice and more like a verdict, a death sentence for the life I'd always known. It was taped to our main gate, flapping in the dry Colorado wind like a cheap, ugly flag, and the words were already burned into my memory. 72 hours to demolish all unauthorized structures, or face litigation, fines, and forced removal. Signed, the Briarwood Estates Homeowners Association. 72 hours. My blood ran cold, sure, but mostly it boiled. This wasn't just a threat to me, Caleb Vance, or the dusty little cabin I call home. This was a threat to the 15 acres that my great-grandfather, a hardscrabble immigrant, had fenced off back in 1932. My grandfather built the red timber barn after coming home from Korea. My dad added the greenhouse where we kept the heirloom tomatoes. And yeah, I put up the chicken coop and the little lean-to for the goats last spring. Apparently, that lean-to was an act of war, because the HOA, they made one mistake, you see. They were so busy trying to look down on me, they forgot to look down at the very ground they were standing on. They forgot who the real landlord was. And 3 days later, instead of tearing anything down, I officially tripled their rent. Yeah, their shiny little HOA clubhouse, the one with the granite countertops and the sad little pool, their manicured tennis courts. The whole lot was sitting on land that, thanks to a century-old handshake and a stamp family lease, I legally owned. That lease? It expired last Thursday. They gave me 72 hours to tear down my heritage. I gave them 30 days to pay triple the new market rent or get ready to pack up their precious amenities. I remember delivering the paperwork myself. The HOA president, a woman named Victoria Sterling, nearly fainted right there in the lobby. Victoria, all crisp white linen and expensive perfume, the kind of person who treats a clipboard like a royal scepter. Her hands were shaking so bad trying to dial her legal team that I thought her diamond wedding band might fly off. I just smiled at her, a calm, cold, rancher's smile, the kind you wear when you realize the bully has finally picked a fight with the wrong, quiet guy. And I leaned in close, just enough for her to hear, and I said, "You thought I was just a cowboy. You should have done your homework, Vic." That's when the screaming started behind the boardroom doors. But the real question is, how did this war of deeds and dollars even begin? I need to take you back about 6 months, before the notice, before the threats, before Victoria Sterling and her cronies decided my life needed to be miserable. See, my ranch, Ironwood Creek, sits right on the border of Briarwood Estates, a gated, master-planned community. I'm out here raising heritage chickens, keeping bees for honey, and boarding a few horses. I run riding lessons for local kids on the weekends. Nothing fancy, just a few dollars to keep the feed bags full. It was peaceful. Or it was. Victoria Sterling, blonde bob, pastel pantsuits, and an attitude that screamed I deserve to speak to your manager. She was the new HOA queen, and she walked around like she ruled the county. Her husband, Howard, was always 3 steps behind her, quiet, tall, balding, with that strange, vacant smile of a man who stopped winning arguments decades ago. They showed up unannounced one Saturday, just as I was hammering new planks onto the chicken run. Victoria didn't bother with a greeting. She just wrinkled her nose and said, "We've had some complaints about the noise and the smell. Is that a rooster?" I glanced at Ringo, my proud old Wyandotte, who let out a crow so loud it echoed off the new stucco houses. "Sure is," I said, leaning on my hammer. "Part of the ranch. Been here a lot longer than Briarwood." She clicked her tongue and scribbled. Howard tried to be the good cop, bless his heart. "It's a lovely place, Vance. Real rustic charm. Quite the throwback." I gave him a nod. "Thanks. My granddad started it. Been in the family since 32. Victoria didn't care about history. She was already inspecting the fence line like a health inspector sniffing out a violation. "We'll need to talk about that, Ron," she said, pointing a manicured finger at Ringo's mansion. "I don't believe it was approved by the Architectural Review Committee." I finally put my hammer down. "I'm not in your HOA, Victoria." She froze mid-scribble. "Excuse me. Ironwood Creek is private land," I explained patiently, trying not to laugh at her shocked expression. "Never opted in. Never will. I pay my county taxes, I follow zoning, but your rules stop at that fence line." She recovered quickly, forcing a tight, plastic smile. Well, your property borders the community, and some of our residents have voiced concern about the noise, the horses. One child claimed your goats were menacing. I looked at Billy, my old fainting goat, who was currently eating a rose bush. Menacing. Right. I'm just letting you know, she said, her voice tightening like a screw. That we'll be keeping a very close eye on things. And just like that, she turned and marched off, Howard shuffling dutifully behind. That was the first time. The second time was worse. It was early summer, and I'd opened the ranch gates for a community picnic, pony rides, lemonade, simple stuff. I invited some of the Briarwood folks, honestly trying to build a bridge. That's when I met Elena Rios. She was a single mom who lived 2 streets over, and she showed up with her son, Mateo, who was about 8 and undergoing chemo. Mateo was pale and quiet, clinging to his mom's side, until he saw the horses. Then his face lit up like a Christmas tree. Can he ride? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Even just a slow walk. I smiled. Absolutely. Say hello to Daisy. That day, Mateo rode my gentlest mare, Daisy. He giggled the whole time. Elena actually cried quietly on a hay bale after the ride, watching him insist on feeding Daisy carrots. It was one of the purest moments I'd witnessed out here in years. Then Victoria showed up. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She just stormed over, red-faced, and launched into me. Caleb, did you get permits for this? This is a commercial event. You have vendors. Do you even have insurance for this liability? I calmly pulled a folded copy of my ranch's liability coverage from my back pocket and handed it to her. She wasn't expecting that. Then, because I'm just that kind of guy, I offered her a glass of freshly squeezed lemonade. She didn't take it. She just glared at the document, scribbled something on her pad, and stalked away. 3 days later, a letter showed up. Not from the county, not from the city, but on HOA letterhead. Violation of zoning codes, unauthorized public events, unpermitted structures. That's when I knew it wasn't about rules. It was personal. She didn't like the ranch, didn't like the animals, or maybe she just hated that the local kids loved this dusty little place more than the HOA playground with its fake wood chips and broken swing set. Over the next few weeks, it was a slow, deliberate choke. Complaints about Ringo. Reports of loose bees near the community pool. One neighbor actually claimed my goats were staring menacingly through his fence. And then came the final, arrogant notice: tear it down. 72 hours. They had no court order, no sheriff's badge, just a piece of paper and the delusion of authority. I could have panicked, sure, but instead, I went digging. I drove down to the county recorder's office, pulled every dusty scroll and brittle map related to my land. I was looking for gold, and I found the motherlode. Turns out, back in 1949, my grandfather, in a moment of civic goodwill, signed a renewal on that ancient lease with the original developers for a tiny parcel of his property to be used for community recreational purposes. The original lease was 99 years. It had expired 4 days before the notice arrived. And guess what sat on that land? The entire HOA main amenity area. Legally, the land was mine again. I called my lawyer, Camila Ortega, a woman sharp as barbed wire and tough as Texas leather. She helped me file the reversion paperwork, clean and simple. Then I drafted the new lease, $3,000 per month, paid in full, on the first of the month, or vacate. I hand-delivered it to Victoria at the next board meeting. She opened it with trembling hands. You can't do this, Caleb. I already did. I replied, my voice flat. Howard, for the first time, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor and thank me. But Victoria's face twisted into something ugly. We'll see you in court, Vance. You will, I said, raising an eyebrow. Good, because I've already reserved the date. As I walked out, the shouting started behind the boardroom door, followed by a loud crash, probably a coffee carafe, and then someone screaming, "What do you mean we're trespassing?" It was glorious. The very next day, I woke up to find my front gate wide open and my favorite sign, a little wooden oval that said Ironwood Creek, EST 1932, snapped clean in two. It meant nothing to them, but to me, it was a tribute to every early morning and every callous hand that built this place. I didn't get mad. Not yet. I just picked it up, dusted it off, and quietly nailed it back to the fence post. Then I did what every Vance man before me would have done. I saddled up my old quarter horse, checked on Ringo and the ladies, and went about my chores. But the silence that morning wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. I could feel eyes on me, from the briarwood walking path, from the second-story windows of the stucco monsters closest to my fence. They were watching, waiting to see what the cowboy would do. Victoria hadn't responded to the new lease. No call, no email, no payment. But I wasn't waiting. I was building my case. I went back to the courthouse, pulled every zoning map, every plat line, every document related to that original lease. I took photos of their shiny clubhouse sitting squarely on my property. I logged every single day they failed to respond. Meanwhile, the neighborhood got weird. Jeffrey Thorne, one of the HOA board members, used to walk his perfectly groomed schnauzer past the ranch every morning. After the rent delivery, he started picking up his pace, yanking his dog like they were fleeing a crime scene. Another woman, Cassandra, who used to bring her grandkids over to feed the goats, now looked at me like I was holding a flamethrower instead of a feed bucket. But not everyone had turned. One afternoon, I heard the crunch of gravel and saw Elena Rios's old Toyota pull into the drive. Mateo was in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket, his head bald from treatments, but his eyes still glowing when he saw Daisy. Elena got out and walked over slowly. "I heard what they're doing to you, Caleb," she said, biting her lip. "It's not right. They picked a fight they don't understand," I told her. She looked down. "They told me. If I supported you, if I brought Mateo here, I'd lose access to the HOA Kids Activity Fund. That's how I pay for his art therapy." My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. That was low, even for Victoria. "Elena," I said softly, "you can still come here. You don't need their permission. You never did." That night, I hosted another small gathering. Just 3 families. No signs, no banners, just campfire marshmallows and pony rides under the stars. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't tell anyone. But I saw shadows watching from across the pasture. The next morning, there was another envelope. This one was red. It said I was being sued by the HOA for interference with community peace, illegal gatherings, and property encroachment. It was a joke, but jokes can cost a man his livelihood. Camila, my lawyer, laughed when she read the complaint. "They're shooting blanks, Caleb, but they want to scare you, drain you, drag you through the mud." "I'm not scared," I told her. "I'm just tired of the dirt." "Then we fight smart," she said. We gathered more evidence, records, photos, testimonies from people who'd been bullied by Victoria's HOA. And then, something unexpected happened. A stranger showed up at my gate, tall, lanky guy in a Broncos jacket, sipping coffee. "You, Caleb Vance." I nodded. "Name's Hank Wells, land assessor. HOA hired me to reevaluate the property lines out here. They think they can redraw the lines?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Hank chuckled. "They're grasping, man. But I had to come." He walked the perimeter with me, taking notes, and at the end, he leaned in. "For what it's worth, your case is solid. If anything, they're the ones trespassing." He paused before leaving. "You know, Victoria's been president for 5 years, but people are talking. There are whispers of a recall vote." That was interesting. Something I could use. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to check on a feed order. When I returned, there was a commotion near the edge of my property. Several Briarwood members were gathered by the fence line, shouting at my ranch hand, Luis. Luis, a quiet guy, looked shaken. "They tried to come onto the ranch, boss," he said. I told them to stop. One of them shoved me. 2 sheriff's deputies were there, confirming no one had actually crossed the fence line, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a hay knife. "You might want to put up a camera, Mr. Vance," one deputy suggested. My gut churned. This wasn't petty anymore. It was getting dangerous. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every rustle outside made me jump up and look out the window. I kept my hunting rifle nearby, not to use, but just in case someone forgot this was still private land. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was feeding the horses when I heard tires crunching the gravel. I looked up to see a city vehicle followed by Victoria's black SUV. She stepped out, flanked by 2 men in suits. "Mr. Vance," one of them said, holding a file folder. "We've come to serve you with a temporary cease and desist order. The HOA is filing for an emergency injunction." "On what grounds?" I blinked. "That your land use is causing distress, interfering with community functions, and that your structures pose a safety hazard," he recited robotically, handing me the file. Camila was on speakerphone before they even pulled away. They're bluffing, she hissed. But we can't ignore it. I looked past the papers, toward the clubhouse, the gym, and the tennis courts that all sat on land they no longer owned. All right, I said quietly. Time to play their game. The next morning, I walked to the clubhouse fence with a big, freshly painted white sign under my arm. I nailed it to a post just before sunrise. It read, "Notice, private land. Lease terms expired. Access revoked until payment received. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The HOA board met that night in a panic. The next morning, something even bigger happened. Someone, I won't say who, but it wasn't me, had chained the clubhouse doors shut with real iron chains. A bright orange notice was stapled to the door, locked due to unpaid rent. By order of property owner. Victoria called the police, but the police couldn't do a thing because, legally, the land was mine. That's when she completely snapped, right there in front of the news cameras that had shown up. I watched from my fence line, arms folded, Ringo crowing his approval. This was far from over. But it was finally my turn to fight back. And the next move? It was going to be loud and permanent. It was just after dawn when the deep, vibrating rumble of heavy machinery broke the morning silence. The sun was barely peeking over the ridge when I opened my front door to the sight of a bulldozer and two flatbed trucks pulling up to the edge of my property, specifically the sliver of land behind their beloved tennis courts. They weren't mine. They were sent by Victoria Sterling. And trailing them like a royal entourage was Victoria herself, standing tall in her pastel blue suit, arms crossed, lips tight. Beside her was Jeffrey Thorne, the board member and one of the HOA's lawyers. Victoria was grinning, that cold, Victoria smile I'd seen 100 times in movies but never believed in real life. "Caleb," she called out, cheerfully venomous. "Just letting you know, since you claim to be the legal landowner, we've decided to clean up the place a bit. Remove some of your unsightly debris." The bulldozer's engine growled to life, already nosing onto my grass. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Instead, I lifted my phone, pointed it at the machine, at Victoria, at the lawyer, and clicked the photo button. "Smile," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You just officially committed trespassing and unauthorized use of private land." Click, click. I got it all. The trucks, the people, the smug faces, the timestamp. By noon, Camila had filed a temporary restraining order against the HOA executive board members, halting all activity near the disputed property. But it was too late for one thing. They had already ripped up the west pasture fence, a part of the original Ironwood Creek boundary line built by my grandfather. When I saw that sturdy timber lying in splinters, something in me snapped. This wasn't just a battle over property lines anymore. This was war. I called in favors. Big ones. That afternoon, 3 massive commercial development survey trucks rolled up my gravel road, followed by a small fleet of contractors. These weren't random workers. These were urban developers I'd partnered with during a real estate downturn years ago. People who owed me a few large favors. Victoria saw them from across the road and marched back down, Howard trailing behind, his face pale and sick. "Caleb," she barked. "What exactly are you doing now?" I looked at her and smiled, a genuine, delighted smile this time. "I'm preparing the land for development, Victoria." Her mouth opened, then closed. "This is ranch land," she hissed. I knew Victoria was trouble when she started finding my grandson for chalk drawings on my own driveway. She said, signing the form without hesitation. "You just make sure you don't become her on the other side of this." That stuck with me. Don't become her. A few days later, we had 73 signatures. Just enough. The HOA board was forced to announce a recall vote for Victoria Sterling in 21 days. And that's when she pulled her most extreme move yet. Victoria filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming emotional distress, slander, and loss of community value. The suit demanded $500,000 in damages. $500,000. I read it at the kitchen table, my hands shaking. This wasn't a power play anymore. It was a full-scale personal attack. I agreed to one final interview, a quiet sit-down in front of the barn. I told the whole story. The grandfather, the lease, the threats, the arson, the garden, and finally, the $500,000 lawsuit. I didn't yell or cry. I just told the truth. At the end of the segment, the journalist asked, "If you could say one thing to Victoria right now, what would it be?" I looked directly at the camera. I'd say, thank you.